The biggest problem with telling people the story I was told, your depression is in your head, it tells you that the reason you're depressed is you're broken. Actually, you're very sane if you're depressed. It's no sign of good health to be well adjusted to a sick society. Our pain makes sense. If you're depressed and anxious, you're not a machine with broken parts. You're a human being with unmet needs. You need food, you need water, you need clean air, you need warmth. If I took those things away from you, you would go haywire really quickly. We just have natural psychological needs. There are things you need as a human being to feel good. You need to feel you belong. You need to feel you have meaning and purpose in your life. You need to feel that people value you and see you. You need to feel you have a secure future that you understand. And if you take those things away from people, many of them will feel really bad. We've been encouraged to live in ways that don't meet our human needs, that are actually quite sick, they're destructive in all sorts of ways. They're destructive for our psychology, they're destructive for the planet's ecology, they're destructive for huge numbers of people all over the world. Depression and anxiety are not pathologies that are about biological breaks, right? There are biological factors that can make it worse, but that's not the core of what's going on. They are responses to your needs not being met. Pain signals evolve for a reason. They're telling you something's going wrong. And the fact that we have this huge depression, anxiety and addiction epidemic across the Western world, something's gone wrong. Well, what is it that's going wrong and how do we actually begin to fix it? The reason why I'm alive, you're alive, everyone watching this is alive, is because our ancestors were really good at one thing. They were really good at banding together and cooperating. Often they were not bigger or stronger than the kind of beasts they took down and ate. What they were was incredibly good at cooperating compared to other species. They banded together into hunter-gatherer tribes and they worked together all the time. In the circumstances where we evolved in the savannas of Africa, if you got separated from your group and you were off on your own, you would become depressed and anxious for a really good reason. You were in terrible danger. You could be eaten. If you got injured, no one would be there to help you. You'd probably die. Every instinct that we evolved as human beings is to be part of tribes, of communities. Bees need a hive, humans need a tribe. We've been told this story that we should think of ourselves not like that, not as this collaborative, cooperative species, but as individual economic rationalizers. The reality is that has produced a society that is lonelier than any human society ever. We are the first human beings to ever try to disband our tribes and live alone. Well, the high priestess of neoliberalism, Margaret Thatcher, told us there's no such thing as society, there's only individuals and their families. In neoliberalism, at the heart of it is about promoting the idea that you should think of yourself as an individual who's maximizing their rational economic interest and maybe that of your family. Actually, that set of beliefs, if it had been followed throughout human history, would have led to the extinction of our species. Neoliberalism has told us this false story about human nature, and we have constructed a society based on that theory that therefore doesn't meet people's human needs. Just like we know that neoliberalism created the 2008 economic crash, neoliberalism has also created the social crash that we are currently living through. At the same time, neoliberalism creates a story where there's this $10 billion industry that tells us, oh no, your pain is just because you've got some chemical problem in your brain. And so neoliberalism fucks us up and then tells us a bullshit story about why we're fucked up, which they then tell us as a reason to sell us even more things. You know, I had this really weird illustration of this. Peter Thiel is the founder of PayPal, disgusting right-wing gazillionaire who funded the Trump campaign. He has a venture capital fund that were developing apps to deal with depression, anxiety and addiction. I was invited to go and speak at their venture capital fund. It was the most bizarre experience. And if all you knew about depression, anxiety and addiction was this day-long conference, you would think that these were just problems inside people's brains. The whole day is spent looking at brain scans. The only outside factor they ever mentioned was a few people mentioned in passing childhood trauma. And I was like, you could describe the plot of Romeo and Juliet using like Newtonian physics if you wanted to, right? The atoms move in Romeo's body this way and the atoms move in Juliet's body that way. It would all be true, but you wouldn't understand a fucking thing about why Romeo does anything or why Juliet does anything. You'd be misunderstanding. And in a similar way, if you spend your whole time looking at what happens in the brain without looking, well, what's happening in the person's life that's changing their brain, you're missing the point. And the reason why this is so connected to neoliberalism is you think about the fact that it's Peter Thiel who's organising this conference to profit from it, funding this idea that let's go and tell everyone that their distress is just something wrong with their brains. Their ideology didn't let them see a really basic truth in front of them. A lot of the factors that are causing depression and anxiety had already been rising before the internet came along. We were becoming much lonelier. We were thinking more and more that life is about having money and status, which makes you depressed. We were disconnecting from the natural world. And then the internet arrives and it looks a lot like the things we've lost. It offers you Facebook friends in place of friends that are in a community. It offers you status updates in place of status. The average person checks their phone every 6.5 minutes. 42% of people never switch off their phone. Like all addictions, it's an attempt to fill a hole. If that takes up too much of a space, you're going to feel constantly frustrated because it's not meeting that deeper need. The deeper need we have is for meaningful human contact that's face to face, that's about a community of people who see you and know you and value you. There's a Bosnian writer, Alexander Heyman, who said, home is where people notice when you're not there. What you need is that sense of home. People will see you and notice when you're not there. What's happening with social media is a symptom of the wider disconnection that's happened in the culture, and then in turn it makes it worse. You know, I was depressed for 13 years. It never occurred to me that there were social causes of my depression. I was a Thatcherite to my own pain. If you're in a consumerist culture where you're taught all the time the solution to your problems is to go shopping, I don't think it's surprising that we will look for cures to our depression that are like going shopping. That we'll think the solution must be to swallow something, buy something. The fact that we look for a solution in pills is a symptom of the wrong direction we've gone in that's made us so depressed and anxious in the first place. I was taking antidepressants for 13 years and I remained depressed for most of that time. One of the things that was really interesting to me was actually to realise how normal I was. Actually, enormous numbers of people taking these drugs become depressed again. The average effect of chemical antidepressants is a 1.8% improvement on the Hamilton scale, about a third of improving your sleep patterns over time. So that's a real effect, right? That's above a placebo effect. I'm not against these drugs. Loads of people I love are on them, and I don't urge them to stop. But 1.8 points on the Hamilton scale is not enough. I don't want to take anything off the menu for depressed and anxious people, but we really need to expand the menu. And one of the things I learned was that there are loads of different kinds of antidepressant which are actually about changing the way we live and the way our society works that reduce depression even more effectively than just drugs alone. I interviewed this South African psychiatrist called Dr. Derek Sommerfeld. Derek was in Cambodia when they first introduced chemical antidepressants in Cambodia in the early part of this century. And the doctors there, the Cambodian doctors, were like, what are these drugs? They didn't know about them. And so Derek explained. And they said to him, oh, we don't need them, we've already got antidepressants. And they were like, I will tell you a story. So there had been a guy in their community who one day had stood on a landmine left over from the American invasion of Southeast Asia, and he'd had his leg blown off. So they gave him an artificial limb and they sent him back into the fields. It's apparently quite painful to work in water when you've got an artificial limb, and he was pretty traumatised because he's in the place where he was blown up, and he just became really depressed. And they said to Derek, well, we gave him an antidepressant, and Derek was like, well, what did you do? And they said, well, we sat, we listened to him, we figured out why he was depressed, and so we figured if he became a dairy farmer, he wouldn't be in such pain, he wouldn't be in this place where he was traumatised, and he might get better. So they bought him a cow. Once he'd had the cow, within a few weeks his depression went away. So they said to Derek, so you see, doctor, that cow was an antidepressant. Now, if you've been made to think about depression the way we have, that it's a biological fault in your brain, that sounds like a joke. But what those Cambodian doctors intuitively knew is depression is overwhelmingly an understandable response to things going wrong in life. And what you need in that situation is for someone to sit with you and help you get a solution. Now, that guy couldn't afford a cow on his own. And most of the people who are depressed and anxious in Britain can't fix the situation on their own. It needs bigger social changes, but we can fix it together. One of the things I learned researching my book Lost Connections is that there's all this interesting evidence that inequality is causing depression and anxiety. One of the stories that really helped me to understand it is Robert Skidelsky went to live with a troop of baboons when he was in his early 20s. Baboons live in this really hierarchical system. Say there's like 30 men in the group. Number one knows he's above number two knows he's above number three, all the way down. And where you are in the hierarchy determines what you get to eat, who you get to have sex with, whether you get to sit in the sun or the shade. Robert Sapolsky wanted to discover, when are baboons most stressed out? So what his job for like a while was he had to dart them in the back to kind of tranquilize them, and then he would take a blood test from them. And when you're stressed, you're flooded with a hormone called cortisol. That way he could figure out what was most stressful. And what he discovered is there are two circumstances in which baboons, who are very close relatives, are most stressed. One is when their status is threatened. So if you're the top guy but you sense the other guy is circling, then you get really stressed. The other is when your status is low. And this to me is one of the most interesting things. In Robert's troop that he was following, there was this little guy at the bottom who he called Job, after the most unlucky person in the Bible, who seemed to have like fits. His hair would fall out and everyone would just beat the shit out of him. But Job would do, he would keep his body down and his head down, he would put his bum in the air, and this is what's called a submission gesture. Any baboon that's pushed to the bottom will do a submission gesture. It's their way of saying, all right, you fucking won, I'm not fighting back, please leave me alone. They keep their bodies low and their chests low. And it's funny, when we talk about being depressed, we talk about feeling down. And I realised when I feel depressed, I do literally feel down. I want to keep my body low. So when you feel your status is insecure, or when you feel your status is low, you are significantly more at risk of depression and anxiety. And I think this is very deep in our biology and our nature. We're not so different from our cousins. And a lot of us are showing subordinate gestures. And just like that poor little baboon are going like, please, okay, you've beaten me, just leave me alone. I noticed that a lot of the people I know who are depressed and suffering from a lot of anxiety, it really focuses around their work. Gallup, the opinion poll company, did this detailed study we've got about how people feel about their work in our culture. What they found was 13% of people like their work. 63% of people are what they called sleepwalking through their work. And 24% of people fucking hate their work. Do you think about that? 87% of people don't like their thing they're doing most of their lives. And I thought, could this be affecting, depression and anxiety? It kind of seemed like it must, but how, right? I discovered there was this amazing Australian social scientist who'd actually discovered the answer in the 1970s. Michael Marmot discovered the key factors in work that cause depression. If you feel that you are being controlled at work, you're being micromanaged, you are considerably more likely to become depressed. And I think this is because human beings have an innate need to feel that what we do with our lives is meaningful. And if you're spending from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. 5 days a week being controlled, that disrupts your ability to construct purpose out of your life. In Baltimore, I met this woman called Meredith Keough. Meredith used to go to bed every Sunday night, just sick with anxiety. She had an office job. It wasn't the worst office job in the world. She just felt a lot of anxiety around it, and she just couldn't believe this was going to be the next 40 years of her life. So one day with her husband, Josh, they did this quite bold thing. Josh had worked in bike shops in Baltimore since he was a kid. And working in a bike shop in the US, you're controlled, low paid, pretty insecure, you don't have any rights at work. One day, Josh and his friends who worked in the shop were like, what does the boss actually do? We fix all the bikes. So they decided to do this experiment. They opened a bike shop that worked on a different principle. It was a democratic cooperative. So they decided we don't want to have a boss. What we're going to do is we'll take all the big decisions together, we'll share out the good tasks and the shitty tasks, we'll share the profits, and we'll see how it works. Many of them talked about having been depressed and anxious when they worked in this controlled environment, and how much their anxiety and depression had gone away. And it's important to say, it's not like they quit their jobs fixing bikes and went and taught like surfing in the Florida Keys or got to be like a backing singer for Beyonce. They fixed bikes before, they fix bikes now. The difference is they went from a controlling and humiliating environment to one where they had autonomy, where they could construct their own meaning and purpose in their lives. And Josh said to me, it's an unbelievable propaganda victory for the kind of capitalist system we live under to tell people you're free when you're in fact controlled most of your waking life. Imagine how fewer people would be depressed if you knew that tomorrow morning you were going into a workplace where you elected your boss and where you knew your boss was accountable to you, as well as the other way around. Imagine the effect that would have on people's mental health. And it's also, by the way, even better for businesses. There was a study at Cornell University that found that more democratic businesses grow 4 times faster than top-down businesses, for the obvious reason that in a democratic business, people are more committed and you've got more brains on every job, right? You haven't just got the guy at the top, you've got everyone. When I was learning about how to deal with depression and anxiety, I spoke to loads of scientists, I spoke to loads of people. One of the things that most moved me though was this place I kept going back to in Berlin where something kind of incredible happened. So in the summer of 2011, a Turkish-German woman called Nuria Cengiz, on a big anonymous council estate in Berlin, put a sign in the window of her flat. And the sign said, I got the notice saying I'm going to be evicted today. Next Thursday I'm going to kill myself. And this was a big kind of council estate, very few people knew each other, and people start walking past Nuria's window, and so they knocked on her door. Everyone on this council estate was pissed off because everyone's rent had been rising and lots of people were being evicted. They were like, maybe if we just blocked the road for a day and we wheel out Nuria and she sits there, like probably some journalists will turn up, they'll probably let her stay in her flat. So they block the road, they wheel Nuria out. Nuria's like, well, I'm going to kill myself anyway, I've got nothing to lose. And loads of people from this council estate stand there and they protest for the day. It gets a bit of press coverage, and at the end of the day, the police come along and they're like, all right, you've had your fun, take it down. And they're like, no, you haven't said that Nuria can stay, Actually, we all want a guarantee that our rent's going to be frozen because we can't go on being forced out of our neighbourhood. They were sure that the minute they left, the police would take it down. So one of the women there, a woman called Tanya, was like, well, I've got a klaxon. We'll all agree to like man this barricade, and if the police come to take it down, just let off the klaxon. We'll all come down and stop them, right? So you suddenly have all these shifts where people who had never met each other, would never even talk to, were actually quite frightened of each other, start to talk to each other. For example, Nuria, who's a conservative religious Muslim, wears the hijab, was paired with Tanya, who wears tiny little miniskirts, even in the Berlin winters, which is hardcore. At first it's really awkward, but as the nights went on, they begin talking. And Nuria and Tanya discovered something, that they had both come to Kotti as kind of runaways. Nuria had come when she was 17. She'd grown up in this very poor village in Turkey, and she came with her 2 kids, working at every job she possibly could to send home for her husband so he could come. And while she was there, she got the news that her husband had died. So she was suddenly just kind of stranded in Germany on her own, a place she barely spoke the language. And then Tanya told her that she had run away to Kotti, that she had come when she was 15. She'd basically been thrown out. She'd ended up living in a squat. She ended up having a kid when she was very young. And these people who'd been so different had both been stuck on their own with young kids lost in this place. Opposite the council estate, there's a gay club called Südblock. Initially, when they'd opened this gay club, they actually said, look, you guys can just come and have all the meetings about this here. And at first people were like, you're not going to get these very conservative Muslims to come and sit in a club underneath posters for fisting night. It's not going to happen. But actually, as one of the people wrote to me, everyone took these small steps, learning to speak to each other, you know, to talk to people who might be different to you in some ways, but are actually very similar to you in most ways. So the protest goes on for months and months and months. One day, it was about 6 months into the protest, a guy turns up. He was called Tunkai. And Tunkai is in his early 50s. He's obviously got some cognitive difficulties. He has a slightly misshaped palate, so he finds it hard to speak sometimes. Tunkai just started offering to like clean and do stuff for people, and people really liked him. He was very huggy and warm. And one day the police came to inspect everything. Tunkai doesn't like it when people argue, so he went to hug them, and they thought he was attacking them, so they arrested him. And they took him away, and that was when it was discovered that Tunkai had actually been in a psychiatric institution for more than a decade, and he'd escaped, and he'd been living homeless until he came to Kotti. They took him back to the psychiatric institution and locked him away. The people at Kotti were just outraged. The psychiatrists were just completely baffled that suddenly hundreds of people descend on their psychiatric leave. And they're like, what is this? It's like a load of Muslims in hijabs, gay people and punks demanding that they let him go. They said he belongs with us, until eventually they forced the psychiatric institutions to release him. How many people in our culture, if someone carried us away, have hundreds of people who are going to descend on those people to say, no, he belongs with us? There were many ups and downs in the protests that happened at Kotti, and there were many times when it seemed very low and people were very disheartened and they wanted to give up, but they ended up doing this petition run that got a rent freeze in Berlin, that got the largest number of signatures of any referendum initiative in the history of the city of Berlin. And I remember when I went to speak to Nuria one time, and she said to me, you know, I got to stay in my neighbourhood, that's great, but I gained so much more than that. I was surrounded by all these amazing people and I never knew. And another one of the Turkish women there, Neriman, said to me, when I had grown up in Turkey, what I called home was my village. And then I came to live in the Western world and I learned that what you call home is just your 4 walls and your family if you're lucky. Then she said this protest started and all of this place became my home again. She realised that she had been homeless all those years she'd been living in the Western world, and in some sense we are all homeless because our sense of home is not big enough to match the need we have for belonging. And so many of the people at Kotti had been drugging themselves for depression and anxiety, had been really low when they were broken up and isolated. They didn't need to be drugged, they needed to be together. And so many of the problems that had seemed insoluble when they were broken up, like Tunkai in a psychiatric hospital, or Nuria, who was literally about to kill herself, what she needed was people saying to her, we need you here. Tanya, one of the protesters, she put it to me so well, when you're all alone and you feel like this, you think it's just you. But then you come out of your corner fighting and you realise everyone else feels like me too. And you stop being weak and you start being strong. And to me, that was the main thing I took from Kotti, that when we are together, we can solve these problems. When we are following the neoliberal script of being broken up, isolated individuals, we just can't solve these problems. We can take the edge off them with some drugs, but the core of the solution is when people come together and say, this isn't good enough, and we deserve better, and we demand better, problems that seem insoluble begin to be dealt with. you.